Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started. Hey friends, how are you doing? Oh, I'm very sad because this is like the last plant profile in the Prisoner's Herbal book, but I'm very happy because it's all about rose. And yeah, the focus of the book is more about kind of like general uses of rose petals, for example, and it's not as kind of explicit as, you know, making amazing medicine like rose tincture or rose petal glycerin, which you can't do in prison. Because, you know, rose is like a huge ally of mine. I talk about rose a lot in the Herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course. You know, there's like so many deep, fascinating, different dimensions to rose and its kind of affinity for people who are often very like inflamed blood vessels, you know, from kind of being in like fight or flight all the time. But yeah, so this is not the only podcast that I will ever do about rose, if that makes sense. This is just a reading from the Prisoner's Herbal book with some kind of like thrifty little things you can do with rose petals written for people in prison. But yes, some other news. So yeah, I'm a little bit tired. I had a very long week in Calais last week and then I kind of topped and tailed it with prison visits, which maybe wasn't so wise, but it just makes so much sense when all my friends are like in the southeast inside. So yeah, I was very lucky to see my friend Kevan and also to see Ryan Dwyer, who is one of the Kill the Bill prisoners and an absolute babe. But yeah, Calais was a very intense week. On day one, someone got shot and some people ran to the clinic and were screaming, saying someone's been shot. So I just grabbed like the go bag and followed them and ran to the person. And yeah, I won't dive into it in detail. I've talked a little bit about it on Instagram, but luckily he was okay. He was in hospital and he got out. And I think we did the best we could in a like first aid context. But yeah, it definitely has stayed with me in terms of how awful it is for people living there and all the news, you know, about the legislation and how people are criminalized and just like, yeah, the kind of rage and injustice about it all. It's definitely hard to swallow, especially like when you're like really interfacing with it a lot all the time, if that makes sense. So yeah, but we have, exciting announcement, we have launched some t-shirts to help raise money for the clinic. If you didn't know, we kind of lost one of our main funders, which was like a herbal medicine company. And yeah, we're very short on funds. We're kind of fundraising like trip by trip at the moment, which is frustrating. If you can recommend any grant funders, I would love to hear about them. But yeah, we have these beautiful t-shirts with the illustrations that my close friend Amani has drawn, which we've used on like the bandanas and then the colouring book. And yeah, the plants chosen are all plants that we use regularly with the clinic in Calais. And the text says, plants know no borders. And there's another design with solidarity knows no borders. I think the reason the plants know no borders like logo or like phrase is like so special to me is because I think, yeah, plants are just incredible. Like they don't, you know, like they don't recognize like nations, if that makes sense, in terms of like capitalist nations or borders, you know, like seeds disperse and travel like all around the world and plants kind of, you know, live all over the place. And yeah, they're just really beautiful defiance against the border regime, in my opinion. And I think that our clinic is also trying to be in defiance to this hostile environment. You know, like our medicines are harvested from the land where we live. Generally, I mean, we have to buy some things in, but generally like we, you know, sow the seeds, we grow the medicines ourselves, we make the medicines, and then we offer them in support and solidarity with people fleeing war and oppression and torture and all sorts of horrific things, and who have ended up in Calais and then because of the violence of the British state are not able to find a safe way across. You know, they have to risk their lives on the water because there are not the mechanisms in place, unlike, you know, for refugees from Ukraine or Hong Kong, where there is like some administrative systems where people can apply for visas from different locations, but that is not in place for people from other places, you know, like Syria or Rojava, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. And so, yeah, people are having to risk their lives to cross the water. So, yeah, so I'll put a link in the bio to those t-shirts. Please check them out. For people listening from England, Wales and Scotland, there is a demo in London on the 25th and 26th of April at the High Court, like the Royal Courts of Justice, where Kev, my friend Kevan, in prison is bringing like a legal challenge against his prolonged solitary confinement. It's a really, really, really big deal. You know, like if he wins this, like it would just like highlight like the horrific abuse and torture he's experienced in prison, and, you know, hopefully also shift where he is in the prison system, if that makes sense. You know, solitary confinement is this like really widespread torture technique. And yeah, in England, like it is mostly in this kind of like high security estate, and it is like generally targeted at like Muslim, Black and men of color, you know, also white working class men. But yeah, they are like often, you know, routinely attacked, denied food, like bullying and harassment from officers. You know, I've lost count the amount of times like I've spoken to Kev and horrific things have gone down, you know, like them using CS gas like in the bloody like segregation unit when they're not meant to, or when they, you know, like bang on his door at night at 2 a.m. screaming at him saying they're going to murder him when he gets out of his cell in the morning, like, or just like sleep deprivation tactics. Like there's just so many like horrific things that he's been through. You know, like he's been one of my best friends for the last 6-7 years, and, you know, I visit him all the time. We speak pretty much every day, and just, yeah, what he has to live through is just like hell on earth. And yeah, if you could make it to that demo, I would really, really, really appreciate it. It would also be really nice to see people. I feel like I've been very antisocial because of the pandemic and everything else, so it'd be really lovely to see you if you're in London. Come and say hello. And yeah, the other reason to support the demo is because Kev is like the most incredible organizer. Like even if he wasn't, like we should still show up for people in these conditions. But the fact is, like, he's taken so many risks inside to show up for other prisoners, you know, to risk abuse and punishment himself, to call out against injustice. You know, part of the reason he is so targeted is because he is so vocal and persistent with advocating for abolition, you know, for alternatives to prison, against racism, like everything, you know, like he's an amazing guy. So yeah, please come to that. And you may have seen on Instagram, I shared a post, but I just wanted to plug it here, because I know lots of people that listen care about abolition. They're working towards liberation in different ways. And I just wondered what people think around abolition and children and young people. Like, what oppression do they experience? How do their, you know, struggles fit in with abolition and vice versa? And I must say, like, I haven't, you know, it's definitely like a growth area for me, like learning, you know, like thinking in that context, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's an amazing writer called Anima, who has written a book called Innocence and Corruption, an abolitionist understanding of youth oppression. And they are a teenager, and they are an amazing organizer as well. I was on their podcast a couple of years ago, maybe, called We Speak of Freedom. And so basically there's like a Kickstarter that's been launched asking for people to donate and like pre-order the book. And they also have like a bunch of beautiful t-shirts depending on your pledge amount. And yeah, this is like one of the quotes by Ayana. "You have been taught a lie. That lie says we live in a society that loves children. But children are some of the most at-risk, coerced and oppressed people on the planet. We are one of the most forgotten, marginalized groups, as so many mock our liberation. Most adults will not talk about this with the nuance, perspective and experience that is needed, whether because they just don't know, don't care, or want to protect their privilege. So I, a radical abolitionist, writer, liberator, delinquent teenager, will write out the words and thoughts that I believe have been missing from the minds of so many of us." Gives me goosebumps. So yeah, and it's part of a new Black-led micro-publisher, which is giving a platform to marginalized writers, which has been started by Ayana and also Eshe, a friend of mine, who's also just an incredible organizer, like coined the term full spectrum community care, just so consistent all the time. So their website is theanimaprint.org. And check out my post on Instagram, which, you know, has all the various links and things, and I'll put the links in the show notes too. And I'm gonna get onto Rose, because I know the roses aren't out yet where I am, but hopefully people will be listening to this podcast in all sorts of like back to front ways. So it might be that you are seeing roses where you are right now. I just cannot wait for rose season. I've purposely tried to not book much in June because I just love it. I just make liters and liters and liters of rose petal glycerite, and then I distribute that to folks experiencing repression for the rest of the year. So anyway, enjoy the episode. Okay, rose. So the Latin name, so it's Rosa, different Rosa species, and the plant family is the Rosaceae family, the rose family. Identification. Roses have a climbing habit and prickly stems, as in bramble, but the stems are rounded in section, so they look smoother, apart from the prickles. Their leaves are not evergreen and are divided into 5 to 7 leaflets, which, apart from the end one, are in 2 rows along the leaf stalk. Large stipules, leaf-like structures, are attached to each side of the lower part of the leaf stalk. For wild roses, they have large white or pink flowers in the summer, becoming red hips in the autumn. And obviously there's like 1,000,001 other species of roses, right? That are beautiful and have different colours and petals and everything. Okay. Other species. There are 13 species of wild rose in Britain and many hundreds of different kinds of domestic cultivars. Wild roses include field rose, sweetbriar, downy rose, and commonly used medicinal roses include apothecary's rose, damask rose, and Provence rose. And Europe's native rose is dog rose, Rosa canina. Okay, folk names in English. Rose, queen of flowers, Rosa, which is briar. And many more, I'm sure. Chemical constituents, tannins, pectin, carotene, fruit acids, flavonoids, fatty oil, nicotinamide, vitamins A, B, C, E, and K, and folic acid, calcium, potassium, sodium, sulfur, iron, saponins, rutin, and quercetin. Okay, food and nutrition. So rose petals and rose hips have many well-known uses, most famously in the perfumery and cosmetic fields. However, rose hips have been long made into various conserves. In her Herbal Kitchen book, Cami McBride shares that she makes rose hips into drinks, smoothies, vinegar, cordial, oils, ghee, bath, and foot soaks. She uses the rose petals for facial masks, steams, body wraps, therapeutic baths, and foot soaks. Ecological role. Wild roses can be found on dry to moist soils, especially in lowland woods and hedgerows. Cultivation. Roses generally like partial shade to full sun with frequent watering. There are many resources and opinions about how to grow roses. Energetics. So temperature, they are cooling. Moisture, the petals are moist and the hips are drying. Tissue states indicated include heat excitation, damp relaxation, and cold depression. And the tastes are bitter, sweet, and astringent. And then in terms of herbal actions, rose petals are alterative, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, astringent, nervine, nutritive, and tonic. And rose hips are antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, antispasmodic, astringent, carminative, nutritive, and tonic. And I'm sure many, many, many more. So some of the health challenges supported by rose: nutrition and immunity. Research from way back in the 1930s showed that rose hips had 24 times more vitamin C than oranges, plus good supplies of vitamins A, B, and K. Gabrielle Hatfield writes how rose hips substituted oranges during the Second World War through impressive self-organisation. The collection was organised at a county level by schools, voluntary groups, and branches of the Women's Institute. By the end of the war, 2,000 tonnes of rosehip had been collected for syrup manufacture. The syrup helps to fight infection in the digestive tract. The petals also have good antiviral properties and combine well with St. John's wort, elder, and self-heal for treating viral infections. Sore throats and toothache. Cami recommends gargling rose petal tea for a sore throat, and rose water or rose tea also makes a good mouthwash for mouth ulcers and bleeding gums. Eye troubles. Rose petals boiled together with chickweed was a traditional medicine recorded by Gabrielle Hatfield. Rose water or cool rose tea is also a soft, safe eye wash. Nervous system support. Julie and Matthew write that rose buttresses the nervous system, relieves insomnia, soothes nerves, and evens out heart palpitations and arrhythmias. I know from experience how cooling water can be for people in states of hyperarousal and post-traumatic stress. Elizabeth Brooke, the author of the fantastic book Traditional Western Herbal Medicine, writes how rose is an excellent heart remedy following shock, trauma, heartbreak, and all kinds of depression and anxiety. It cools agitation and restlessness, gives hope and space, and helps to drown out dark, negative feelings such as suspicion, cynicism, bitterness, and anger. Rose brings a feeling of love, well-being, peace, and happiness. Rose can create a sense of safety inside, even if the outside is not safe. It can help increase inner strength to cope and help us relearn to receive love when barriers have been put up. It is also a powerful support for those experiencing loss and grief. Skin inflammation and general skincare. Rose can also help cool skin inflammation and take the heat out of boils, acne, spots, and rashes. Rose vinegar is also commonly used after prolonged sun exposure. Rose is incredibly popular for skincare and is used in all variety of lotions, toners, face sprays, cleansers, and more. Cuts. Rose leaves have been used to treat cuts due to their astringent and antibacterial action. Vaginal challenges, uterine pain, excessive menstruation, cramps, and menopause. Julie and Matthew Seal write how rose is a cooling tonic, reducing uterine pain and the cramp of heavy periods, and supplements the treatment of infertility and low libido, especially during menopause, where it is particularly cooling and balancing. Rose is also used in vaginal steaming and can be a safe, effective douche too. Alexis J. Cunningfolk describes how excessive menstruation is eased by a strong tea of dried rose. Also useful for uterine spasms and cramping, a vaginal douche can relieve infection, inflammation, and conditions such as vaginitis and thrush, checks diarrhea and internal hemorrhage. Add to postpartum sitz bath for healing. Digestive issues. Rose can be used to reduce the spasms involved in diarrhea, colitis, and dysentery. Alexis also highlights that rose has probiotic qualities, and in addition to supporting healthy gut flora, it assists in clearing toxins from the gut. It assists with promoting healthy metabolism and helping return the body to its ideal weight. Use rose during and after the use of antibiotics to rebuild gut flora. A rose petal bath can have a cooling effect on hemorrhoids. Cautions: the short hairs in rose hips are dangerous internally and have been added to infamous itching powders used in pranks for generations. It's always best to process rose hips, for example, by boiling and using in syrups. Caution is also advised during pregnancy. How to practically use roses in prison. Where you might find roses. So I know many prisoners will see rose listed in the contents and be like, what the fuck, there are no roses in prison gardens. However, I included it because in HMP Bronzefield, where I was, the main courtyard was full of them. I think in newer prisons, especially private prisons, they are planted up with flowers like roses to somehow sanitize the suffering and violence inflicted by the prison on people's lives. For the many visitors and government officials walking around the gardens, plants like roses give the impression that it is a better place than it is, if you know what I mean. If you are lucky enough to have roses grown somewhere, then they are likely to be in full sun or at the very least partial shade. They will be planted in beds and not growing in the concrete like plants like dandelions. Okay, sore throat, make a strong tea with rose petals and gargle. Mouth ulcers and bleeding gums, make a strong tea with the rose petals and gargle. Viral infections, drink rose petal tea. If you can access rose hips to process and make into tea, even better. Eye inflammation, make a strong tea with rose petals. Combine with chickweed if you can, but no problem if you can't. Once it is cool, try to wash your eye with it. In the How to Prepare Plant Medicines in Prison section, I have included information on how to make an eye bath. Insomnia, drink rose petal tea. Stress, despair and grief, drink rose petal tea. Skin inflammations such as boils, acne, spots and rashes. Add rose petals to your bath if possible. You can also make a strong infusion with rose petals and soak fabric in the infusion, then apply to the area. DIY skin toner or cleanser. Wash your face with cool rose petal tea. Small cuts. Place a rose petal directly on the cut. You will be amazed at how quickly it can stop bleeding. Hot flushes due to menopause. Drink rose petal tea. Menstrual cramps. Drink rose petal tea. Vaginitis and thrush. Add rose petals to a bath if possible. Diarrhea. Take sips of rose petal tea during recovery. Hemorrhoids. Add rose petals to the bath or make a sitz bath with a strong rose petal infusion. Okay, that's it on the amazing rose, and I will speak to you all soon. Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityApothecary.org/podcast.